For all things Charlotte Readers Podcast, check out charlottereaderspodcast.com. You can find a list of all episodes, an alphabetical guest list with links, detailed show notes for each episode, a community blog, and more. We'd love to have you visit.
All right, we're into Act 3 today of Charlotte's Podcast, and we're going to be having a combined writing and marketing talk today. Sometimes we'll have a writing talk on a topic, sometimes we'll have a marketing talk, but it so happens that the question that we have come up with to talk about today kind of feeds into both, and that question is, can participation in a critique group and engagement in a writing community help your writing, build your audience, and market your books long term? Sounds like it has a kind of rhetorical there.
I don't think we're just going to say no and move on.
Yeah.
Not at all.
Answers no. All right, Act 4.
Anyway,
well, so before we get to how it helps you and build your audience and market your books and that kind of thing, Sarah, I know that you participate in a critique group regularly. I did for a little while, but then I got busy with podcasting and writing a novel, and I didn't have time. So let's talk about your experience with a critique group, kind of how it works and what some of the benefits are of being in a critique group. And then maybe we'll expand this, and Hannah and I can talk more about the community as a whole. Yeah.
Sure. So I love critique groups and writing groups. I'm in probably too many at this point. Like I've gotten a little bit over enthusiastic about
many?
it, but oh gosh, I don't even know, which is probably not good. But I have a few different groups that
101.
are critique groups. So they're kind of based around giving notes and feedback to each other. We read each other's work, and then we give responses and help each other kind of build our craft. I'm in some writing organizations like the Charlotte Writers Club, or the Women's National Book Association has a Charlotte chapter. I'm in some groups where we get together and we do writing prompts, which is just a great way to get creative and kind of take yourself away from the bigger projects that you're working on and try something totally different under kind of a lower stakes situation. I have one group where we get together once a week with our laptops, and we sit and we chat for a while, and then we write for a while, and then we chat for a while, and we try to be quiet, but sometimes we don't succeed. So there's a lot of different ways that you as a writer can get involved with other writers and find your kind of writing community. And I think that the notes are hugely helpful. I mean, for me, that's really integral to my process, is getting feedback from other people, because sometimes you just have blinders on when you're writing. You know, you can't see the forest for the trees if you're too close to the story. So it's really, really helpful to get that feedback from other people. And also giving feedback, I think, is just as helpful as a writer. It helps you push yourself to read analytically and critically, and to not just sort of respond in the subjective way, but think about, okay, why am I responding to things in a certain way? And if I were going to try to help this writer improve their work, what could I suggest that might move them in a better direction? So it's really good practice to give people notes as well, I think. And there's also just a big social benefit to being part of a writing community. I mean, writing by its nature is a very lonely thing. You know, it's one person alone with a computer or a notebook or whatever it is that you're using. And it's really helpful to get to know other people who understand that process and can support you. And sometimes when it's not going so well, maybe talk you up, give you that little pep talk when you need it, someone if you just need to commiserate and gripe about it, or give you good ideas, and you can talk about your processes and what's working for different people, and help support each other when you have something coming out that you can, you know, buy each other's books, go to each other's events, support each other on social media, that sort of thing. So I think it's really important to kind of build that community.
And let me mention to our listeners, and maybe, Sarah, you can drop this link in the show notes, but we do have your article on our community blog on critique groups that you wrote and put up, which has got a lot of really good information in it. And listeners, we've got a lot of good blog posts there, and more to come, because as part of Beyond 300, we're encouraging authors, writers to submit to be on the blog, because you're going to get a mention if you do. In fact, we're going to mention another author today, a writer today who's submitted, because it kind of ties into this discussion. But yeah, look at that article, because Sarah, you talk about feedback, you talk about giving feedback, getting feedback, you talk about how to be creative, networking, and camaraderie, which you mentioned. But you also talk about this question. So, what do you do if you want to join a writers group? You know, where do you go? How do you get in?
How you find them?
Yeah,
Exactly.
How do you find your tribe?
Yeah. I went into that a little bit on the blog post, so you can check that out. But for me, I think, it's basic, but starting with Google is always a good place to start. Like when I moved out here to Charlotte a few years ago, before I even got to town, that was one of the things I did was I Googled Charlotte writers groups or Charlotte, North Carolina writers groups. And that was how I found the Charlotte Writers Club, which has great monthly meetings with speakers and things like that. And they also have critique groups that they host through the club. So I got involved with some of those. Looking at libraries or local bookshops, a lot of them will have groups, or they might be able to point you in the direction of something in the area. Meetup.com is another one that I've used where I think when I moved to New York a couple of years ago, I found a writers group there through meetup.com. And it's one of those things too, where it's like writers know other writers. So once you're in one, you'll probably meet other people who can point you to like, oh, I know this person who's starting a group out here and wants to focus on this genre or something like that. So you just kind of build your network one piece at a time. But yeah, especially like getting involved with your libraries and your local bookstores is a great thing to do anyway, just to get to know those people. And also look beyond local. Like that's been one of the great side effects of the pandemic over the past few years is writers groups have moved online in a lot of cases, or I'm in a few that are hybrid. So people who are local can be there in person, but they also have a Zoom option. So you can join events at bookstores all across the country and libraries all across the country, and you can find maybe groups that are more targeted towards a specific genre or something that you're working on. So, look outside of your area too, because there's a lot of opportunities out there right now.
Yeah, and so I when I got to the point that I decided I wanted to take writing seriously, I'd written these novella-length kind of Christmas books while I was still practicing law, and I wanted to learn more about writing. I did two things. I got involved in the writing community, and I started a podcast. And there are lots of things. I'm not suggesting every author go out and start a podcast, but there are a lot of things that authors can do. If you want to start a podcast, do it. Find people you want to talk to and do it. But and I enjoyed the critique group when I did it. But there's a time commitment there, Sarah, right? Because when you're in a critique group, not only are you looking for feedback, but you're also reading other people's work and giving them feedback. And I suppose there are different kinds of critique groups. There's short story, flash fiction. The novel groups probably require even more commitment in terms of time. Is that your experience?
Yeah, and every group is different. So you can also, try to find something that's a good match for your schedule and how much time you're able to commit. I have groups where we might have, say, like a 2,000 word limit submission per meeting, or 3,000 words. Sometimes everyone who's in the group submits at every meeting. Sometimes it might be a smaller subsection. I have screenwriting groups where sometimes it's a little bit different for a screenplay versus a novel, because a screenplay is a lot faster to read. So we might submit like one feature screenplay that a person has written per meeting. And we just read the whole thing and talk about it. But every group is different. So whether you're looking for a group or even if you want to start your own, that's something that you want to think about, is like, how much time can you actually put into this? Because it's not just the meeting time, it's also leading up to the meeting. You're going to be doing some reading, you're going to be writing your notes. I have a group where we have also like a discussion topic at the end of every meeting. So sometimes you have to pull an example from a book that you want to talk about for that. So there's a lot of different ways that it works, but it is a time commitment for sure. But for me, it's totally worth it.
All right, well, let's bring our book whisperer into the conversation here, Hannah, to talk about how being connected to either a critique group or in the writing community, whether it be your local writing organization or something else, can actually help you in terms of promoting and marketing your books long term.
Yeah, and just another note too, while you were talking, I was thinking about it's like different writing networks in each state. So like with North Carolina Writers Network, I feel like there's so many different resources on there as well, where you can kind of get connected with folks who are, could be doing something similar to what you're looking for. And there's like the Table Rock Writers Workshop up in the mountains in North Carolina, so something like that. So it's like things that can fit your schedule better.
I was going to add to that, Hannah, because I had this list I put together one time for this talk I gave on building an author platform on different places you can connect. And of course, in Charlotte, you get Charlotte Lit, you got the Charlotte Writers Club, you got Charlotte Montgomery Library, you've got WMBA Charlotte, and I'm sure there are other organizations as well.
Right.
That, there's open mic nights, different places. The statewide organization, you mentioned the North Carolina Writers Network. There's also the North Carolina Poetry Society. In the Triad, there's this group called Redbud Writing Project, which is similar to Charlotte Lit. And then in the mountains, there's Looking Glass Rock Writers Conference, where I went a couple of times and took courses with Craig Johnson, and a couple of other really great writers. And then there's the Flatiron Writers Room up in Asheville, and they have some great courses there. And then Wild Acres Writing Workshop. And then you got online classes. You can actually connect through some of these online classes that Writer's Digest has, or Lit Reactor, or some of these others. And then, of course, there's writing organizations all over the state, Winston-Salem Writers, High Country Writers, Pamlico Writers, and the list goes on. So there's lots of places to get connected.
That's true. I mean, that's a good point about COVID too, and just like one of the, very few silver linings of the situation has been just like that you can connect with people from all over the world. And it's just really neat because sometimes in these classes, like the writing classes that I've been involved in, there's people from, it's like a different country, and you're like, how do you even find out about this? But I mean, and I guess that does kind of tie into the whole expanding your community aspect too, which, just to get into that a little bit, it's really kind of a neat thing where you could start out just thinking to yourself, oh, well, I like to write a little bit. I wrote this book, but I don't know what to do with it. And then, what happens is you build your community. It's really the kind of point of all of it, right? So it's just, I think that it's something I hear a lot from authors, especially either debut authors or people who have kind of been toying around with a story in their mind for a long time and haven't, whatever. It's scary to put yourself out there. So I think that's half the battle, is just kind of getting to the point where you're thinking, okay, well, do I really want to be in a critique group? Am I ready to be critiqued? This is going to make me sad or something like that. And I mean, that's hard for some people, right? So, but I think looking at the bigger picture here, it's just kind of one of those things where it can absolutely help in the long-term marketing plan for whatever you decide to do. And if you do plan on putting your work out there and submitting to agents or like whatever you decide to do with your project, you kind of have a built-in audience if you've been working on your community. And to me, I think that's really fun. And I don't know, that's probably a me thing in some ways too, because I like to talk. But even if you don't, it's finding like-minded people who enjoy each other. And I think a lot of the feedback that I've gotten from either clients who are in writing groups or just friends or anything like that, or people who lead writing groups, that's the best part, is the community. And then when someone in your class publishes something new, you're like, oh, wow, this is awesome. I'm definitely going to buy this. Then I'm going to tell my friend, it's like, and I think, talking about Judy Goldman earlier, she's kind of like a North Carolina or like a Southern legend at this point, right? Like, and part of it's like, but she's very present in the community. Like, she's in writing groups, she does events at local bookstores, she's very communicative with her readers and on social media, whatever you want to call it. And so that's a perfect example right there of just how you do that. Landis, you do a great job of that too. You're kind of like all over the place at all times. I think I asked you one time, like, do you go to sleep? When do you do that?
Well, I just do it. Do what Hannah tells me to do. That's what I do. Yeah. But
I can be bossy. No.
A good point.
I think you
there.
do a great job.
But I would add to that by saying, a lot of authors, you come out with your first book. I know when I came out with my first book, I've got 4 now. You're so intent on writing the book that you don't look up and think about marketing the book. You don't think about who's going to actually blurb the book. You don't. So if you're building your community, when it comes time to, have your blurbs put together, if you got a larger community to draw from, people that in the writing community can blurb your book, you can blurb their book. This guy, I mean, look, I'm very grateful that there were a number of authors who had appeared on the podcast who did reviews of my book, either in the book or on Amazon or Goodreads or whatever. And of course, we're promoting their books on the podcast. So there's sort of symbiotic relationship going on here that, we like what you're doing. You're going to support us. So think about it that way. As I said earlier, you don't have to start a podcast, but, there are authors who do blogging. They might feature other people's books in their newsletter. They might feature them in articles they write, or when they go to a book signing of their own, they might mention somebody else's book that's just come out. So these are all the kind of things that authors do in the community. And I know, Sarah, you probably had some experience like this.
Yeah, I mean, my fellow writers have been my best champions with my book and everything that I do with my writing because they get it, they
Right.
understand that when you have something out there, you want and need that support from other people. They know how important it is for people to buy your book, to review it on Amazon or Goodreads, to promote it on social media, that sort of thing. So they've been great champions for me, and I love to do the same, in return for them. And I also just something that Hannah mentioned too about sometimes writers are kind of nervous about getting critique and getting notes for the first time, which I totally get, and it can be nerve-wracking. But I will say, like, if your goal eventually is to get published or to get your work out there on a broader scale, it's less nerve-wracking to get that feedback, from people you trust and know and from friends than to get it in the form of reviews from strangers.
Yeah.
So it's a good, you
point.
kind of have to get over that hump first. And it's a good sort of practice to get the notes at a point where you can actually use them and do something about it, and then get yourself ready to eventually put your work out there to agents or editors and to readers within the
That's
world.
a really good point. It is kind of like a step before the big jump where you're sharing it with a much broader audience. And I do think it's easier to get like feedback from people who you've been going to class with and you form these relationships
Right,
with,
right.
and you really value their opinions too. But I mean, yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing where it's scary for a lot of people. And I think that but after the first class, I mean, I can even relate to that, like looking back on my first class that I ever took for writing, or I've done a lot of nonfiction, like essay writing classes, because that's kind of where my strengths are, I think, in that area. But it was so nerve-wracking. The first class, I was like, what if I've been lying to myself for all these years about my talent?
Yeah.
But
Well,
it's a lot of fun.
you make a good point there, sir, about getting honest feedback and getting it from people that you trust. You certainly don't want somebody to give you feedback that says, "Oh, it was really nice, it was really good," or whatever. You want constructive. It kind of reminds me, and I hate to be beating this Western horse with Lonesome Dove, but I know all the lines in the book. So this line, Jake Spoon, who is a good friend of the main characters, he got in some trouble and they had to hang him because it was just the code of the West. He got involved with some rustlers, and his line to him was, "Well, I'd much rather be hung by my friends than my enemies."
Yeah.
So if
great
you're,
motto for a critique group.
if you're in a critique group,
Yeah.
I'd much rather have my stuff trashed by my friends than by my enemies, because you are going to get those 1-star bot
I
reviews
like
out
that.
there.
Yeah.
Well, what is it like? I feel like, and I know I've talked to you about this before, like, it's like you're not a real writer until you get like a 1-star review on
Yeah,
something.
I've been collecting a few, yeah, and you don't really get them until you branch out and do these promotions. Like
Right.
you give away 100 books on Goodreads. You give away, like I've got a BookBub deal coming up. Well, it'll be gone by the time this episode comes out. But it's that kind of thing. A bunch of books will get out of there into the world, and then a bunch of people review it. Well, you're going to get people that download your book, and maybe they just don't like your genre, and maybe they don't like whatever, and you're going to get some. I'm proud to say that Deadly Declarations now has about 190 some reviews on Amazon, and I've only got one 1-star review, and I've got one
Wow.
2-star review.
That's
so
really
nice.
good.
Yeah, exactly. So, but we had
Print them out.
we had a rejection episode on Charlotte's podcast early on, and y'all can go back and listen to that if y'all want. It was a lot of fun where we reviewed rejection letters that people got, and there was this one person, I can't remember who it was right now, but she was submitting and she was getting rejection after rejection, and so her goal was to get to 100 rejections. So she kept a big old board up there, and she and her husband would cheer her on every time she got another rejection. But she got accepted by about 80 or 85, and it blew her goal of getting 100 rejections.
See, I think that's kind of cool though, like using it just in that way versus getting upset. It's just like, it's kind of just one of those things.
Yeah.
Use it for motivation,
All right, we're gonna, as we said, we're gonna mention writers who contribute to our blog. We want to mention a writer here who contributed, who on a topic that's close to what we're doing now, and her name is, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it right, Sita Romero. She received her MFA in creative writing from Queen's University in Charlotte. Her work's been published in print and online literary journals, and before writing full-time, she worked in women's health for 15 years. She grew up in Florida, now lives in Virginia. Her debut novel, Words We Cannot Say, was published, and her memoir, Vanishing Shoals, is out as well, I believe. Anyway, her website is cedarromero.com, but her blog post, Sarah, maybe you can drop a link in the show notes there. It Takes a Village, Finding Your Writing Peers, which I thought really tied in well, because the first thing she talks about is writing and loneliness. Have you ever experienced that, any of y'all, in terms of writing?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think
I
another.
feel like you mentioned that earlier, Sarah. Your whole, you're like
Yeah,
into
yeah.
the whole of writing.
It's definitely a hermit's profession, so sometimes you have to force yourself out of that writing hole.
She says writing can be a lonely business. From the time she first started taking writing seriously, she began to engage with monthly writing groups, coffee shop meetups, and online communities. And as a newly serious writer more than a decade ago, she attended classes and workshops. I mean, this sounds like a formula. The more I talk to authors on the podcast, the more I hear this. I mean, Steve Berry, I asked him, he's sold like millions of books and all over the world. And he said he was an overnight success, but it took 15 years for it to happen. And he started out in a little critique group, a little writing group. So I do think it's important, if you want to take it seriously, if you want to take writing seriously, get connected with some other people you trust, and get after it. She also talks about the pandemic that hit, and finding your people and how things can throw you a curve. But so she kind of reached out through Zoom. Didn't we learn a lot about Zoom and other virtual techniques? I mean, I had to do the whole podcast virtually. It taught us some new tricks. I'm looking at a dog behind you there, Hannah. Speaking of dogs and tricks, did your dog do any tricks there? There you go. Listeners, you can't see it, but they're two black, what are they, Hannah?
Black golden doodles. They have to be right next to me all the time. So this is just
Of course they do.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Just, like, looking at you, whatever.
But she sort of says, if you aspire to write, all I can tell you is this: don't wait for an excuse to find your people. That's a pretty good motto too, right? Don't wait for an excuse to find your people.
I think another great point that she made in her post too was the idea that being involved in writing groups can kind of expand your range. Like, it'll push you to read people who are writing in genres that you maybe wouldn't read otherwise, and likewise get feedback from people who maybe don't read your type of work regularly. So it expands that reach of the points of view that you're exposed to, which I think is a great point too.
Yeah. So Sita, thank you for contributing to our blog, and listeners, you can go read more about what she wrote on our community blog at the website, and we'll drop a link there. Or you can just go to the website and look under the Community Voices tab, and you'll find our community blog. You'll find our community vlog, and there's a link to my Wade Scripts blog as well. And I think we're going to get some other bloggers maybe who are my co-hosts on there too. So we'll see how that works out too.
We have a newsletter called Beyond 300, and we'd love to have you sign up. This is where we share what's coming on the podcast, provide helpful links, and keep you updated on the podcast and the hosts. You can sign up at charlottereaderspodcast.com or the websites of the hosts, landiswade.com, saraharcherwrites.com, or spellboundpublicrelations.com. And by the way, we won't spam you because that takes way too much time.